Trolls. That classic fantasy staple. In most modern iterations, they're big, ugly, brutish beasts with unbelievable toughness, often with regenerative abilities, and they also come packaged with some sort of debilitating weakness to acid, to fire, or even to sunlight. What I want to try and do today is evaluate how a fantasy society might react to the two different kinds of troll. Tolkien-esque Scandinavian trolls who turn to stone in sunlight, and our D&D style trolls with enhanced regeneration that keeps regenerating them unless those wounds become cauterized. The thing is, to the people of a fantasy world, both types of trolls would likely have immense value as tools. Or at least any fantasy world that is developed enough and brutal enough to make the suffering of troll kind a less potent moral priority than the betterment of mankind. We'll start with our sunlight allergic trolls. And these guys are old, much older than Tolkien. Troll activity and trolls turning to stone have been explanations for various unusual rock features, especially in Scandinavian countries for hundreds of years. Sometimes it's the gods that turn trolls to stone, sometimes it's just pure rage, but oftentimes it ends up being sunlight that is the key critical factor. I mean, for whatever reason, eventually trolls in this tradition tend to become stone. How may the people of a fantasy world use this to their advantage? First, the threat of stoning a troll would likely be a pretty effective coercive technique. This, I think, would be especially true if the motivation to work was also tied in with the troll's desire to get away from the sunlight. Pulling cargo overnight, for example, functioning as the lead car of some sort of cargo train. That would be one such use. The troll would be very much incentivized to, well, beat the sunlight. Another option would be to use interlocking matrices, shutters, fan blades turning, or some other way of filtering sunlight into an enclosed area. Perhaps a turbine powered by trolls with a slowly spinning independent fan above it that reveals sunlight that will clip them in the back if they're too slow. Trolls forced to work in this way would probably be transported under thick blankets, perhaps even in open air to avoid to mitigate the risk of them running off or anything. And I do believe that said trolls would be, with the right motivation, which is, you know, of course, the pain of stoning, would be a big mover in heavy industry. Although, of course, this is in no way an ethical treatment of a sentient, possibly sapient entity. In a slightly more positive sense, it is also possible that these trolls could be used as a general benefit to society, in an actually helpful and consenting sense. These are hulking, gigantic, strong beings with one singular, pretty nasty weakness. But with human ingenuity, we could probably turn said weakness into a strength. Of course, that might simply be by employing them for good money to work, you know, underground somewhere where they'll never see light. I imagine dwarves might actually get a lot of use out of that. But the thing is, our Scandinavian sun allergy trolls don't have the impressive regenerative abilities of their D&D style counterparts, so they can be pretty vulnerable to being cut or stabbed or any sort of damage, and due to their kind of misshapen and lumpy bodies, it may actually be hard to find protective armour to make use of the troll's giant size and make them an impressive force on a battlefield without having it custom made to each troll, which is probably prohibitively expensive. There is, however, a relatively effective way of preparing a troll for battle that doesn't require the creation of fully custom armour. What I think might happen is trolls would be draped in chainmail. The chainmail would then be kind of pinned to their body or attached to their body in some meaningful sense, maybe even by just twine. And then, I think with careful exposure management, you could potentially turn the top layer of the troll's skin, upon which the chainmail is sitting quite tightly, into stone, therefore encasing the chainmail potentially in stone itself. Following that, if you can actually crack out their moving joints with a chisel, say, you may end up with a troll with a kind of reinforced stone armor, kind of acting something like concrete with a reinforced mail underneath. And if that stony outer carapace chips, a bit more sun might render it completely renewed. This would essentially make trolls only vulnerable to heavy bludgeoning attacks which rock the whole body, which kind of makes them equivalent to Arbor Knights of yore, except they're trolls. Yes, these guys can only really work outdoors if, it's nighttime, but I still think there'd be some pretty potent guards, enforcers, or soldiers during those times. Perhaps in underground wars, they might really come into their own. It is likely that said trolls would be nocturnal, as a rule, but I can see trolls that we needed to move during the day having kind of thick fabric veils, much like the blankets I mentioned earlier, except perhaps with a slightly more free tone. A troll gliding through a city street at massive height and great bulk, draped in this weatherproof veil, may well be emanate an aura of mystique, mystery, and even potentially elegance. These may be the hallmarks of a day-walking troll out in the sun. And perhaps these free daywalkers may even affect cultural mores. After all, removing a creature's face or body protection, their veil, may not simply be a social faux pas. It may lead to the death by petrification of either the creature you lift the veil off or, well, yourself if you happen to encounter a gorgon. People may be a lot less willing in these worlds to disturb each other's clothing. Again, outside of the pain of death and stoning we discussed earlier, there are other incentive structures that could well be used, stuff that may motivate a troll. They're often seen as capable of some degree of speech, so most basic motivations would work, especially even some more complex ones that need explaining, unlike with traditional pack animals. As underground or exclusively nighttime labourers, they'd been a massive force multiplier. I can envision construction projects employing masons and stonecutters during the day on site and then using trolls overnight to bring new stones up and perhaps even place stones up on the construction project itself, allowing for 24-hour work with these nocturnal creatures. And they're capable of following at least basic instructions. So perhaps a mixed strategy is in order. Pay trolls well, because they're doing the work of 6 or 7 men. Incentivize them simply, and without threat, but perhaps to avoid danger to life and the danger of savagery that may well be part of their nature, who knows, you put them in fairly remote facilities, in inhospitable and sunny environments. Somewhere off the beaten path and probably a whole day's walk away from civilization. Imagine, say, a quarry and associated broad stonecutting facility in a long way away, probably, 8 hours walk out of town, staffed entirely by trolls with a couple of overseers. Following that, we would have a trusted team of trolls travel from this remote facility, this remote stone quarry, back across a railroad, dragging a whole bunch of cargo overnight, and then being put up on the outskirts of a city before being sent back the next night. This requires fairly minimal investment and provides a very minimalised threat. If the trolls can't actually get anywhere within their active hours that they could cause damage, then it's a pretty safe bet that they're going to be reasonably happy to keep working if they are given the proper incentives and some time off and all the benefits that usual workers are expected or expect to have in whatever world we're dealing with. Of course, this all assumes that trolls can be reasoned with. If not, then we're probably back to my first suggestion, which would work assuming you do need troll labourers. Also, worst case scenario, if trolls are really quite dense and are starting to get a bit, angry or upset. The worst case scenario for these people is the classic Atlas Heracles trick, where you get a troll to hold up something really heavy, a section of roof that would crush it if it tried to put it down. So it just has to kind of keep holding it, keep it up on its shoulders, and just say, oh, I'll be back in a few moments, and then come back in the midday sun, and you have a very, very strong troll-shaped pillar holding up the roof of whatever building you needed holding up. I can imagine, just hold that heavy thing for a second, being a fairly fine and efficient execution method for dealing with unruly trolls. But if I'm being honest, I think this may have been the appetizer. D&D style regenerating trolls are significantly more useful, with significantly more use cases than their stony cousins. Because these trolls have kind of the opposite problem. Instead of dying at literally half of the time in a day, these guys are practically unkillable. The trope is that a troll can potentially even regenerate just from its own severed head. Hell, the newest version of D&D's troll features an ability where if a limb gets chopped off as it's fighting, that limb animates and becomes its own version of a troll. And then that lopped off limb regrows on the troll's body within 6 seconds, unless it is exposed to acid or fire. Clearly, our methods of threat and punishment may not be quite so simple in this one, or quite as possible. The thing is, though, if you have a civilization in a place where regenerating trolls exist, they do need sorting out. Nonetheless, largely because the regenerating troll is an ecological nightmare. An ecosystem generally consists of a lot of living things that seek out and consume other living things to survive long enough that they might reproduce. The living things at the top of the pyramid of consumption eventually slow down, get injured, get a disease, or kill each other in some rivalry. This provides balance and allows beings lower on the pyramid to consume them in turn. The troll is not just the antithesis of this normal loop of ecology, it defies it. Most interpretations of the regenerating troll see them as in some way immune to the process of aging. Generally, they only get bigger, gnarlier, and more knobbly through aging. They seem to be able to recover from all diseases and injuries, or incorporate said diseases into themselves like immortal cancer cells. And rivalries, fights with other trolls even, or other monsters, tend to result in no permanent damage. If trolls can in some way reproduce, and do not regularly encounter creatures that use caustic or cauterizing tools, they will dismantle an ecosystem bit by bit. And weirdly, the fewer fantastical creatures you have in a world, the worse that gets. Sure, if trolls are regularly torched by dragons, it's reasonable that their populations are managed. But if that job is just down to people, well, let's just say there's a damn good incentive for those people to solve their troll problem. Frankly, it may well be an imperative for the survival of life to control a troll population of this kind. The clearest path here, if they're not immune to all kinds of disease, is probably some form of sterilization, or perhaps more simply, the segregation of troll genders. That is, of course, if they breed in a traditional manner. If they use parthenogenesis like Komodo dragons, the process by which females can sometimes give birth or create offspring without the presence of males when males haven't been around for long enough, then separation of the sexes will do nothing. In a worst case, they might reproduce like starfish through fragmentation, where a limb can regenerate itself independently from the main body, which also regenerates a limb. The limb regenerates into a new starfish, as long as it contains some part of the starfish's core. If that's the case for troll reproduction, then there is no hope of controlling their population. So far, that's all downsides. And actually, with those weird ways of reproduction stated, it seems like it's a pretty bad deal for troll domestication, if you can't even control the way that they multiply. Any society that sought to use these creatures for any sort of dangerous manual labour, like working on cliff faces, coal faces, handling explosives, mining, quarrying, or in large-scale construction projects, would need extra safety measures to monitor and ensure the cleanup of any dismembered body parts. And they would need to have on this safety cleanup team some form of fire or acid or destructive element. The sad fact is, honestly, regenerating trolls are pretty much perfect for these kinds of jobs, notwithstanding the need for a literal fire team on standby at a moment's notice to avoid a potential duplication. But what to do with all these torched troll arms? Well, you could try and eat them. Charred and barbecued, or even prepared in an acidic ceviche, or with a rich pineapple marinade. You'd need something with a high acid content to break down the regenerative power of trolls, and pineapple would be perfect as it contains bromelain, which actually does break down proteins. If it is the case that trolls in fact can magically grow back their limbs at a moment's notice with no material cost to their caloric intake or energy, then a large enough troll food bank just constantly severing limbs and, barbecuing them, frying them and putting them in a pineapple glaze kind of solves hunger for however large a civilization you're willing to capture trolls for. Assuming, of course, eating these limbs aren't going to make people incredibly ill. If trolls do require sustenance, though, to regenerate their limbs, which seems reasonable to me, you've got a bit of a harder time using these to solve world hunger. It would be very unlikely that trolls' regeneration would be energy efficient to actually use it as a food, considering the amount of food that you would have to feed them, unless trolls could feed off stuff that was inedible to humans, like potato plant leaves, rotten wood and vegetables, or bones that have already been used in a broth. In this fashion, they'd kind of be used more like regenerating pigs, but about 10 times as dangerous. Again, this might not be totally helpful to most civilizations. Where regenerating trolls really come into their own, though, may well be with medical applications. While troll biology may be vastly different to humanoid biology, there are some situations where non-invasive surgeries are necessary to save a life. I'm specifically talking about skin grafts here, especially used for burn victims. Troll skin may not be hygienic or even human adjacent, but it has regenerative properties and can be disinfected once removed from a troll, perhaps even functioning to have some regenerative properties still. And with proper preparation and maintenance, and perhaps the occasional snipping to ensure that it doesn't start growing on its own, it might well function as kind of the perfect second skin to protect the wounds of burn victims from infection. Likely a massive deal in a fantasy world where generally infections are going to be pretty dangerous. While discussing medicine, it may also be worth noting that it is very likely that the regenerative properties of the troll may well lead to it, or parts of it, or some part of it being used as an alchemical ingredient in the ever so ubiquitous across, fantasy games, health potion. Perhaps that bright red colour that they traditionally have is the troll blood. And if it is, well, that's another damn useful ability that you gain from farming trolls. Frankly, once farming or careful enclosures with some sort of population control has been established, which in fairness may be tough for societies which don't have significant magic, I think we'd actually see a new phase develop in troll rearing, the designer troll. I think that in these societies, trolls may start to be seen as analogous to plants or fungi, especially in their propagation methods, and techniques might start to develop that treat them exactly like that. Topiary, grafting, pruning, and frankly bonsai all spring to mind. Especially for wealthy clients, trolls might start to be pruned or moulded into desirable shapes. Perhaps you'd get little lawn trolls, miniaturized by a process similar to bonsai. Perhaps big, scary looking massive trolls to sit under bridges, toll bridges as enforcers. or trolls that are specifically grown inside a suit of impressive looking armour, or a troll grown with specifically particularly long limbs, and maybe a tiny body as some sort of troll chimney sweep. When a troll regrows its body at pace, it stands to reason that being placed inside, while this growing process is happening, being placed inside something like a mould for their body may well stunt said growth. Or perhaps that growth is simply stunted by cutting and cauterizing to create an idealized form. You could build a troll shape really for any purpose, especially when the threat of acid or fire is a fairly common one when we're talking about people with power, either through their own magic or through their employees' magic or through magic wands or something. I discussed earlier the notion of trolls being put to work in dangerous back-breaking labour, as frankly even a broken back can be fixed by their biology. And I think, again, in a particularly messed up world, which is where a lot of these ideas really belong, that the designer troll is kind of a culmination of this ideal. Grow humanoid trolls with a permanent stoop and shove them down in mine shafts. Grow trolls with massively long limbs, tiny bodies and no legs to speak of, and put them up as high-wire workers, or incredibly skinny trolls for chimney work, and you get to grow more trolls from severed pieces of other trolls, maybe grafting them together, maybe using characteristics from each to create a massive troll which is almost all bulging bulbous skin to be used for skin grafts. Or perhaps other trolls created to have significant muscle and fat mass so that everyone can have their pineapple troll brisket. This is undeniably an abuse of these creatures, twisting them into idealised forms to do jobs decreed unpleasant or difficult for the enlightened folk. But it's not like societies throughout history haven't done the same thing to our fellow man. And animal. Just look at Victorian dog breeding for a pretty one-to-one example. In any case, those are my thoughts. I'm interested to see what you have to say about my thoughts for uses of trolls, either type of troll, in the comments. If you can come up with some others, please do share them down there as well. And do also comment, because on Thursday I'm going to be doing a live stream where I do a kind of live spell breakdown, analysing every single potential implication that a D&D spell may have. If you have any suggestions for what spell you'd like to see, leave them in the comments as well. Because I love searching for the practical implications of magic, monsters and everything in fantasy together. And remember, you can catch this stream and all future streams live, but if you want to catch them after the fact, it's the best idea to join my YouTube memberships program, where you get access to all streams past and future, as well as some extra features and some extra ways to chat specifically with me. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the thegrungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.